My name is Nathalie Klimberg, and I will be facilitating the conference. I'm chief editor of a magazine called Mediakwest, and if you're interested and want to have a look at what we do, we have some issues down at the reception desk. So it's with a lot of enthusiasm that I accepted to animate and to lead this round table, because it so happens that there are coincidences occur. My first experience, my first virtual reality experience, so I lived it in Montreal. I had met Antoine Quels from Judas Studio. That was the summer of 2015, and he was talking to me with a lot of passion about VR. I had no idea what it was, so he said to me, if you want to discover something which will blow you away, which will make you addict of a VR, you have to see a concept from Félix et Paul. So I contacted Felix, who received me very kindly in his company, and he showed me everything around the Cirque du Soleil, and since I have been totally head over heels in love with the VR. So now we're going to move on to the actual topic with people who are more specialists of Canada. So thank you for being present with us. And for visiting us. Myriam, first of all, Myriam Achard. Oh, I shouldn't have said this. You're the direction of the centre fille. So you welcome and greet regularly and organize exhibitions and artistic installations in different forms. On my right here, I have Anna Serrano. To my right here, Anna is what you work for the National Film Office, the Canadian Centre of Film. What is your job?
Chief Digital Officer.
Je suis Chief Digital Officer, responsable du numérique, and Stéphane Cardin from the Fonds des médias du Canada. So with our three guests, we're going to try and have a general overview of what's happening in Canada right now with regard to the financing mechanisms, and I think that Stéphane can maybe take the lead at this point, and then we'll go over to actual showing the productions, and then Myriam, you will say a few words with Anna, who will intervene. So Stéphane, could you maybe give us a general overview with regard to financing, what exists already in the realm of VR? Yes, absolutely. Hello, Nathalie. Thank you. Thank you to Michael and to all the organizers who have invited us here to this festival. And there's a very attractive representation of them there. So everybody, are you all producers or creators here to my right? And I want to know who my audience is. So I have a quick presentation, but we'll go through it rapidly. But just to give you a first idea of what the market is like right now in Canada and the different sources of financing that exist. So we'll show you this presentation. So you can go 2 or 3 slides ahead. So just to give you an idea, general overview with regard to consumption. So it's we're still a niche environment, far from being a mass market for the moment. So only 4% of Canadians have a headset, a VR headset at home. Most of Canadians, it still it remains an exception to watch or consume VR productions. But it is growing. The figures are growing, like in several other markets. It's mostly location-based, but here in Canada, it's still starting out. the first to have invested in the market are the major chains, Cineplex, Max. More recently, there's MK2, who has come over and and they're in the Quartier Latin in Montreal, so they've opened up a venue there. And there are places and venues such as the Phi Center and some projects which are being put together. And there's a project which is championed by Zone 3, which we financed. But it's happening. But once again, we're not talking about mass market for the moment. So this is to give you an idea, in the sense that it's absolutely necessary that the state be involved to support creation in augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality. And what is good is that in Canada we have available budgets and sums and funds of financing which are quite consequent. So the role of the person who's in charge of media in Canada, which is similar to the CNC here in France, although our scope of activity is limited to TV and to digital works, video games, immersive work, and digital series. But we have also helped with budgets with regard to the prototypes of production and putting onto the market almost 80 productions. And you have the details here of Canada Media Fund support to virtual and augmented reality project, 31 million last year. So if we look at what the CNT does between 2014 and 2016 in France, the CNC, there are approximately 60 projects which were helped, and currently the fund which is dedicated to new media it's approximately 3 million euros. To give you an idea, well, I would say that the fund that we have available for all digital work and for this year, which has just started, the fiscal year a few days ago, is 42 million Canadian dollars, which is 0.64 of a euro to the Canada dollars to the euro. So it's mostly most of it is video games, but more and more immersive projects are being helped. The second source of financing. Well, I'll give you some parameters. I'll do this very rapidly to give you the figures. If you can go on to the next slide, Nathalie, please. So, essentially, we have two types of innovation programs. The first one is a program of innovation. Two types of programs. We're looking to help projects which are innovative, either through their storytelling or through the models of the technology used. And it's up to 75% of the contribution of the acceptable spend of the production. So that's a maximum contribution, and we can go up to $1.2 million through all the stages for 2 years now. We have a second program which has been rolled out. And Nathalie, if you can go on to the next slide. So I'll just cut you off. Could you maybe tell us a few of major companies who would have benefited from these funds? Well, I have some examples 2 or 3 slides further on for the productions, but I'd just say 2 words quickly with regard to the program, the new program, which has been in place for 2 years now, and that one is looking to provide assistance in view of the profitability of a project, so the commercial projects, so it can go up to 1.4 million. Maximal contribution is 60% of the spend, and it can go up to a maximum of 1.2 million. But we've also been supporting and helping such projects. So a few examples of projects now on the next slide, Nathalie. So there's the pilot of the sci-fi series, Trinity, which has been produced by Mr. John Hamilton up there, top left, Blasters of the Universe, indeed, which is a project which was produced by, I would say, one of the two major production companies of virtual reality in Canada. It's the second, there's a secret location is the other one, which belongs to the group Entertainment One, and in video games, in the realm of video games, in virtual reality, we've assisted several, notably Time Machine from Minority. So with regard to financing, given that most of our productions are co-productions and they don't cover digital creation, the agreements have been signed only as for cinema and audiovisual productions. So the FMC has started some years back now to sign agreements, not from government to government, but from agency to agency with partners, international partners. We've done it now in 12 different territories now, and you can see some examples up here on screen behind me. These are all partnerships where we've helped produce digital. We've brought funds for digital productions. We have the King of Luxembourg here and the fourth rank, Billy. So we've worked with Luxembourg. And what's interesting to note is that I had to call him the King of Luxembourg at least once. Protocol. So what is interesting to note is that in our programs, there are a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand in our programs. In our regular you have about one chance out of 20 of being chosen in these matching funds. It needs to be specified for some specific territories, a percentage of success. So not all projects are financed, but so far, we have also worked with a high proportion of immersed projects in these matching funds. So, where's France? I can't see France here. Why is that? How is that possible? I don't know. Maybe Anna Charrière could answer. Maybe. I believe that we'll get there. We will manage to work with France, but with France, to be quite honest with you, candid, it's that the agreement, the treaty, the official treaty, is currently being renegotiating, and that would come to cover co-production of digital work. So I think that is the main explanation at that level. But having said that, we are going to continue to try and convince our partners, our French partners, to come on board with us for this adventure. Naturally, another important source of financing for immersive work in Canada is the ONF, the Office National du Film, but I won't dwell on that for too long. I think that you know these works. The Enemy, notably, being a Franco-Canadian production. I believe that my colleagues will be able to say more about that. Where the issue is... No, sorry, I have another slide first. So with regard to fiscal measures, so another source of financing, which is very important. You have to be aware that the fiscal measures were implemented first and foremost to once again to work next to first it was for cinema, TV, traditional mediums, and then one was put in place for video games, and it's being adapted and more rapidly so for immersive works and productions. So I would say that if you have content, if you have content of a maximum of to the maximum of our intervention, if you have productions which with major budgets, I would say that series, for instance, maybe the 5 or 10 million euros of production, it might be more interesting for you to look at using the fiscal measures rather than going through our other financing funds, which are limited. So finally, and this is where the issue is, and I think maybe Anna has much more experience than I have at this level, and will be able to take the microphone and speak further, but maybe this is where the major issue is in Canada at this level. It's that once again, market where you have a secret location and other companies. There are private companies. John have found financing, but it is the exception to have private smaller companies. So now the government has just announced investments of over $1 billion over 10 years for over 100 collaborative projects, including VR projects. But that has just been announced. It was announced just a month back, so maybe Anna, you could tell us a bit more. Maybe you have additional information at that level. But the final slide here, you can see some examples, as I was saying, of companies who've managed to find a private financing in Canada. So you can see the sums here. Apple acquired augmented reality headset startup Ravana for 30 million, and then 1.1 million in seed funding for UNLTD. And then there are friends Felix and Paul who were purchased by, Ravana was acquired for 30 million by Apple, which is fantastic for them. Anna, how does your action work in line with what we've just heard? Is it with regard to what the Fonds National du Canada does?
So at the Canadian Film Centre, so I'm the Chief Digital Officer of the Canadian Film Centre, but I'm also now the Managing Director of Canada's only digital media and entertainment accelerator called Idea Boost. So at Idea Boost, like many accelerators, we invest in media and entertainment technology companies, many of which currently are about a third of our investments are in the immersive media space. So these are both VR and AR companies that are either developing technology specifically, like Masterpiece VR, which is here at NewImages this week, as well as content studios with technical IP, which is how Felix and Paul got their money, and people like Secret Location got their money, etc. And also location-based entertainment services like House of VR. So we actually like to invest in a number of these types of immersive media companies with hybrid business models, because it's not quite clear yet exactly which of these business models will work in the future and which companies will remain sustainable. What's great about running an accelerator in Canada with the sort of public funding of the CMF is that we try to work collaboratively with each other. So one program that Stéphane forgot to mention was their accelerator program. What's it called again?
A2P, Accelerator Partnership Program.
Yes, Accelerator Partnership Program, wherein if a CMF-funded company got CMF money and then got into an accelerator, there's a certain amount of money that CMF then gives them on top of what they get from the accelerator or in lieu of what they get from the accelerator. In Idea Boost, not only do we have the 4-month accelerator program where we provide about $35K to $50K seed investment as a convertible note, but we also have production lab money and commercialization lab money that acts like follow-on investment for these companies. And increasingly, again, following what the CMF has done, many of these production labs and commercialization labs are attached to global partnerships. So in France, one of our big commercialization labs is called Enterprise and Culture, and we have a startup exchange program with the Cultural Services Embassy of France. With the increasing interest of the French government to promote entrepreneurship and innovation in the cultural space, that program is getting more and more well supported. What we're trying to do is essentially take that enterprise and culture commercialization program, which we piloted in France, and have the same types of program in Mexico, in Argentina, and in Korea. And the idea around that is to create a peer network of founders who are in the immersive media space who can either work together as strategic partners or collaboratively across virtual production, workflow, pipeline, et cetera, that they might end up working in. So so that's sort of the big investment that we make. We have a project with the CMF and OMERS Ventures, which is one of our largest venture capital firms, called Pulse on VR, which is looking at the broad ecosystem in Canada and mapping it against market data provided by Greenlight Insights out in California. And this is to study the growth of the VR ecosystem as it's growing. And so that's a very important set of data that we're gathering on a regular basis because we need to determine exactly what's happening in this particular industry. And then last but not least, we do have a certain amount of opportunistic discretionary funding to do R&D, experimentation, and productions in VR. And typically, we like to work with projects that are totally, crazy and may not have any kind of commercial, but where we're really pushing the envelope and using some of the technologies that we've invested in. So our latest project right now that is getting developed is a volumetric cinematic short film piece with Adam Costco, who's a Lumiere award-winning VR filmmaker. And we're excited about potentially designing a whole new workflow for how to do that volumetric cinematic capture that would include a number of different Canadian technology companies to finish out that pipeline.
OK, thank you. Après, la dernière brique, c'est l'utilisateur final.
So finally, after this last break, it's the final user, the end user. So Myriam, you can present to that maybe. So I work in the Centre in Montreal, so we arrive at the end of the chain, of the production chain, because we're a place where we show the works of immersive, interactive virtual reality. So there's a small video here, which I can recognize some people. But who's already been to the Centre in Montreal? Who's visited us? Yeah, quite a few. So this shows you, this video will show you that we don't just show and present works of virtual reality. It's a multidisciplinary venue. There are exhibitions, there's production which is done there, but it will give you a good idea, a good overview of things that we can do.
So we opened our doors about 5 years ago. No one was talking about VR at the time. About 3, maybe 4 years ago, this space was founded and directed by Phoebe Greenberg, a Montreal patron, and two young boys, Felix and Paul, went to see her, said we want to experience a VR experience. We won't explain it to you, we'll show you. So they put a Samsung headset on. She saw strangers. She lived the experience. She says, where do I sign? And that's how we became a business partner with Felix and Paul. And that's how our passion, our interest for VR began, through this partnership. And for the last 3 years now, since 2015, we began to present VR works on a regular basis. It's not like a festival where it's 10 days and that's it. We decided that we'll have a dedicated space permanently to present VR works. So at first these demos were free, and we saw that there was some interest, that the Montreal public is very curious, and right away hundreds of people began to come. Felix and Paul, Gabo Aurora, Chris Milk, at the very beginning, and it was what we launched our garden, our VR garden, with a presentation that changed every 3 or 4 months, then exhibits, thematic exhibits. At the beginning, 6, 8 weeks, and that wasn't enough. So we prolonged these, and for the first time in 2018, we have 2 exhibits, major exhibits. The first began last week, and will go on to August, and the second begins in September to December. When I talk about major exhibits, minimum 10 works, mainly VR, but also sound immersion. The last, to give you an example of the size and the figures, last year, Particules of Existence attracted 15,000 people. That's a lot. We're not Paris, London, New York. And it's not free anymore. The business model didn't make any sense by giving everything away free. So people pay $20 or $15 for special rates, and to give them access to the best things in the world, works from the States, from Canada, France, Dutch, Swiss productions, UK as well. And my role is to go to the different festivals to get the best thing to bring back to Montreal, to show things to our audiences. What's your selection criteria? Is it creativity? Technology? No. It's really got to be something we love. This year we're presenting, in the exhibit that began last year, works that sometimes are over a year old, because we never had the opportunity to show these. These works are relevant. So technologically, these works aren't necessarily at the level of certain works being done today. That's not the problem. Notes on blindness that you probably all know. Even if this work was produced over 2 years ago, it remains in my top 3 of the works of an incredible quality. It has to be something we love. What's the feedback from your public since you've been presenting all of this? Are there changes in perception of critical feedback. Up until now, the critiques are great. Stéphane, I think, you know that the media, the artists, we really take care of the artists. What's interesting among our audiences, our public, people come back, people wait for the next exhibit, look forward to it, but there's still are a lot of people who are experiencing VR for the first time. I still find it fascinating to go to the second floor where we have the exhibits and see people's reactions when people take off their headsets, to see the stars in their eyes, this determination for people to want to exchange with the people they came with, our hosts who are there to help them through.
We're finding a slight change in terms of the companies that we've been accelerating in the location-based entertainment space, which is if that's your core business and you're selling tickets on a regular basis, showing off VR works, licensing works, the maintenance and support costs associated with sanitation, upkeep, etc., is quite hard for a startup. You guys are more well capitalized. And so they've had to really look at a mixed business model whereby they have to either have a cafe like MK2, or they have to have an event-driven kind of corporate rental business. But what's interesting, and this is why I intervened, is where they're heading now is actually more social, Instagrammable, AR-driven experiences. So they've started to experiment with mixing AR experiences with VR experiences, and the AR ones are performing better because more people can be in front of them and can get their pictures taken, and then that could be sent to Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I think that's a trend that, or I'm calling it a trend.
Is it really that they're more successful, or is it more in question of profitability and viability?
Avec ces œuvres-là dont tu viens de parler.
So I think that they're still in the early stages, and they're not quite sure exactly where it's going to land. But they have discovered it so much that they're actually looking. This is House of VR in particular. They're looking at doing a pop-up to test it even further, specifically, and their precedents are spaces like the color theory experience in California, a number of these like more experiential art spaces that are starting to open up.
We should just tell them a bit more about House of VR.
Oh, okay, sure.
À Toronto.
Wait. So House of VR is essentially a two-story location-based entertainment facility with a mixed reality set of bays, as well as Gear VR spaces, and on the second floor is an event space that can be converted into more VR bays or an event space that can be rented. But then they started to experiment because they had enough kind of nooks and crannies and spaces. They started to experiment with AR. So I'm curious to see what you guys think in terms of like how we, as a young VR industry, will start to interface with the encroachment of the equally young AR industry, and how we're going to start to play well together.
On our side, we are trying, we support interactive works, immersive, either VR, AR, mixed, all of this together. Our role is to encourage the works, reduce risk, and to make sure that Canadian industries, companies develop this expertise for us we don't really care where the market is going. We're simply going to adapt as a function of that. And once again, of the orientations, innovation, and some commercial profitability, both. And so, for me, I'd like to put the emphasis on how important it is for us to co-produce. We're lucky in Canada of having great creators. We have companies, we have clusters, we have good distribution, but we're a small market. Canada is about 37 million people in both official languages. We don't have a choice. We can't invest into other markets. That's why it's very important for the FMC in Canada to try and develop new co-production agreements and to have more Franco-Canadian productions. We've supported a few made some requests for financing that weren't accepted. There are cultural affinities, they're obvious between France and Canada, and we have to continue in that direction. We talked about the location-based model, and also what about the broadcasters in VR development in Canada? Well, this is being recorded. I guess we have, French channels, in particular the private channels, have profitability challenges like everywhere else, and in particular in English-speaking Canada because of they're close to the US. So it would be a long historical analysis, but simply to say that these companies have licensing conditions, they have to respect these, and innovation. Maybe you can talk about your experience with course, but generally the broadcasters are quite conservative. It's more the role, sometimes, maybe the public, CBC, the French Radio Canada, which is the French CBC, was a little more avant-gardist. I think it's coming back for the public channels, the English-speaking CBC. TFO, I'll let you talk about that. There's been the Vice experience. Vice Canada had an association with Rogers, a private channel, but basically, with some exceptions, the broadcasters in Canada are not major players in immersive production. It's the National Film Board that's the main player there.
Mais il y a une
chaîne éducative francophone.
Une chaîne éducative francophone s'appelle TFO, qui fait un mixed réalité pipeline, utilise le VR, the VR headset to do motion capture, so that they can actually create animated shows in real time. And I think that is a really, really, really interesting example of how a broadcaster is using these technologies in an innovative manner.
But again, that's a public educational broadcaster. I know that you've done some things with Chorus, but I don't recall exactly.
Sure. So what Chorus has done is invested in innovation. So Chorus is a partner of our accelerator. And so they have put in money so that we can invest in new technology companies. And then for that privilege of giving us the money, they are able to see, get a first look at all the new technology companies that are coming through the accelerator.
Donc,
apart from public funds, you have to depend on yourself when you're a producer. Once again, I mean, it's a very fragmented market. You have the big international players, and the secret locations working with the Hollywood studios, with brands, even secret location, for example, had access to FMC funding. They have access to private capital, but most production companies wouldn't be able to do that without the public support. And we'll still be in that situation for at least 3-4 years before there's a mass market for that sort of thing. And once again, for the time being, there are more people who would bet on location-based than home consumption. Maybe push what you're saying. 3 years ago, when we began to present VR works, everyone said, in a year and a half, 2 years, everyone will have that at home. It'll be a home entertainment. There won't be a future for you. We said, yeah, fine. If it's what you think. 3 years later, it still hasn't gone into the home. Will it be in 1 year, 2 years? We'll see. But even if it is, places like the Center Fee will continue to be really important for showing this kind of work, because once we've had that experience, you want to share, you want to talk about it. Some less, but generally speaking, there's this need to exchange what you experience, what I experience if I'm alone. So if I'm alone, I'll talk to the people who take care of me in the exhibit. Location-based entertainment, like Scientifique, K2VR, are very important. I'll be quite frank, I am surprised that there are more of these centers. This will happen. It has to happen for the artists, for their works to be seen as much as possible, because an artist creates.
But there's a tension right now, I think, in the creator space, because location-based entertainment spaces are obviously where the money is being made, or some of the money is being made. And then there's another type of location-based entertainment, which are called festivals. And so what's happening is you've got this, not just a fragmentation of the market in terms of the size of the companies and where they get their funding, but a fragmentation of the market in terms of, like, there are those companies that are actually making products specifically for LBEs, and in particular the actual pods, you know, whether that's a roller coaster or whether that's like a, you know, and there are a number of these types of arcade-based motorized systems that are in other markets. And then there are those creators that aren't thinking about those markets at all, but are essentially creating content for festivals. And I think maybe in order to create a more sustainable ecosystem in the future, we need to figure out how to start to integrate these fragmented distribution systems in order to allow for some revenues to go to those people who are making VR with no money, and then getting, but also still getting accolades because they get showcased at festivals, etc. It's a tricky problem.
I think you're totally right on that, because it's something we can wish for, that we should have a lot of festivals and immersive experiences for as many people as possible, but somewhere along the line there are certain festivals which will distinguish themselves. Some will allow a premiere in one festival rather than another. That creates some tension for a body like ours, which is a partner with some festivals. I think we were partners there with about 20 festivals of VR in Canada. And in the long run, not everyone will be able to make some kind of profit. Let me just add, maybe because we're talking about festivals, for the creators or the artists here, the programming that I do, I'm not looking after a premiere or an exclusive. Yeah, a Tribeca or Sundance. People are looking to be the premiere, whereas a premiere at the Centre fee isn't as prestigious. So I want to present works that are over a year old. There's no problem. Present your work in the circuits of the festivals, get the visibility, and then we'll be very happy to welcome you. And we offer you the proposal we make. We don't going to take your work for 10 days, except for Alice, but which we had for 10 days, but we want your work for 5 months. And we ensure that there'll be visibility during that time. Last year we had 15,000 people over 5 months, and I think that's pretty important. And we have to keep that in mind. When we prepared the interview, you mentioned that you don't produce. You're not a producer? Not yet, says she. Aha. So, do we get a scoop here? No, you won't get a scoop. I'm not announcing anything today. But clearly, with this collaboration and this business partnership with Felix and Paul, the money which was for production went to Felix and Paul, and as Stéphane was saying, they've gone, they're the royalty of VR. They've been doing it for a long time, and they do really good things. But Phoebe, who's our founder and director, says, why shouldn't we produce as well? So we're thinking about it. Some creators came to see us. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but we can hope, okay, let's say in a year, let's say, we'll have invested in some production. When we talk about VR, we can talk about AI as well. I think you have some quite a lot of expertise in AI in Canada. Oh, I wasn't expecting that one. So when I was talking these fantastic clusters that the Canadian government announced 2 months ago. Vancouver, they did that on digital creation, and in Montreal, they're really concentrating on AI. I have to admit that at the Media Fund, we haven't yet supported companies in that area. It'll happen, but right now we're focused on creation rather than technology, and there'll be works which will integrate both, but beyond, I can't talk very much about that.
Yeah, we've invested in some machine learning storytelling platforms or AI-driven chatbot storytellers or those kinds of things. And we don't have as many of those companies coming through as the immersive media companies, but we are looking around for them because essentially I think Canada is really, even if you look at the superclusters language of which superclusters they invested in, the AI investment is absolutely clear. You know, they know what they're investing in. They understand the technology. They know who the players are. These are the world-class professors that have influenced AI creation in the United States. You go to the other superclusters, and the kind of it's a much vaguer. They're not quite sure exactly what it is that they're investing in. So given the fact that they've obviously sort of implicitly chose a winner, a technological winner, then any accelerator worth their salt with a particular vertical, in which case, in our case, it's media and entertainment, would try to migrate and or integrate some of that technology research into what we're doing.
So we'll move on to any questions you may have, comments.
Hi, quick question about the funds. So in terms of the selection criteria, do you specifically fund technology and content companies that are based in Canada, or would you look at funding projects that involve telling stories about Canada but international companies? And just to contextualize, my company in South Africa produces wildlife documentaries, and we have already in plan wanting to shoot a documentary on the Spirit Bears in Canada.
The answer is we only fund Canadian controlled companies. However, as I said, we encourage co-production. So if we have a scenario where it's a South Africa-Canada co-production, we will fund the share of the Canadian co-producer, whether it be a majority or a minority share. We do have a partnership with South Africa, by the way, with the NFVF, but at this time it's only for television. So if you can identify a good partner for me on the digital side in South Africa, let's make that happen. So it has nothing to do with the subject, just to make that clear. It doesn't, what we support does not have to be in any way related to Canada. There are no points systems involved with key creative personnel. It really just is about split of copyright, split of expenses, split of financing, and split of exploitation revenues. So it's very, very flexible.
On peut en prendre une petite dernière, si on veut.
As a Canadian, Montreal-based content creator who's been funded by the CMF, it's always nice to see you guys talk. We've been very curious about the commercial tranche that's come out over the past year or so. I was wondering if you can talk about how that's been going and where you want that to go, especially in terms of innovative media. It sounds like everyone is very focused on, for example, exhibit-based VR versus, the headset type of VR. So if you're encouraging projects in that sphere, do you have any idea what that would look like?
Well, we've done 2 rounds so far. And the truth of the matter is, whereas our innovation program is massively oversubscribed, the 2 rounds that we've done so far in the commercial program have been not undersubscribed, but we chose not to support all the projects that had been submitted because we felt that some were stronger and others less. The truth of the matter is, I think it's just a reflection of where the market is, and there are few projects that have truly demonstrated commercial return. I think that's going to grow, so I think we're just a bit ahead of the curve. Producers, are used to, in the innovation program, us providing up to 75% of expenses. When we launched the commercial program, we figured there are lower risk projects, so we'll only provide 50%. And I think that had an influence on demand. And in fact, this year we corrected it up to 60%. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some different results this year, but we're still only putting about 12 million in that program, whereas we put in over 20 on the innovation side. So it's something that we're keeping an eye on. But I just think, again, it's a reflection of where the market's at, but that's where the market's going to go. And so we want to continue supporting and developing those kinds of projects. Hope that answers.
Thank you, Myriam. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Stéphane. And thank you, Nathalie. So if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to come up and speak to our members.